Men and beast have battled long for supremacy. But we believe that you have never known a battle so fierce nor so strangely exciting as in the story The Owl That Kept Winking by Theodore Pratt.
The man waited in the darkness behind the palmettos. He sat on an orange crate. He shifted the double-barreled shotgun which lay across his thighs. The gun was heavy. Craned his neck around and looked to the east. That was the direction in which the sea lay, the Atlantic coast. No light showed from there. It wasn't yet dawn, not quite. The owl still didn't have enough light by which to make his darting flight. It wasn't true that owls could see in the dark. It was merely true that they could see with only a very little light, almost none at all, but not nothing. The man looked to the west. There lay the Florida Everglades. Ibis flashed white across a stark blue sky, and occasionally there came the shriek of a wildcat. Now the man heard another sound. It was the soft, deep, and gently inquiring whoo. It came through the black night. Whoo. Well, the owl's call no longer made the man's gorge rise. He had resolved to keep his temper. He could afford to keep it. He did not get angry and rave and rant against the bird which stole his chickens. He had discovered where the owl lived and how it could be killed. He knew there was a pair of them living high inside the big cypress, and that it was the male who came for the chickens. Before he gained this knowledge by careful, painstaking watching, the owl had made away with 17 fowl. But now the man knew the answer to the owl's question. He could barely contain himself from answering the recurrent who and replying it would be you. He was not waiting with fury for the owl to come to the chicken runs. He'd come calmly more than halfway to the owl. He was secreted in the palmettos on the route the owl would take from its hideout in the tall cypress. And the owl wouldn't be flying fast here. It would make an excellent target. Man couldn't miss. It was a big owl, a horned owl. Some people said they were beautiful, but he couldn't see any beauty in them. They were dirty, unfair thieves. Back toward the house in the runs, the roosters were crowing. They seemed to know before anyone else the exact moment of dawn. They were getting busy, leading the hens out for water for the day's feeding. The owl knew they'd be there at the precise moment he would come for them. Best time for the owl, the time of least light. The man glanced to the east again. It was almost too late. He could make out no sign of dawn, but it must have been there, evident to the roosters, plain to the owl, for just then the owl flew over. Shotgun came up as the man switched around in the orange crate. The safety was already off. He fired. At first he was sure he'd missed. There was no solid plump sound to indicate that the body had hit the ground. There was no noise at all, as the dawn had made itself completely evident. And then the man heard a faint, half-swishing, half-flopping around. It was a wing beating at the ground, a bird trying vainly to get into the air. He hurried toward it, and he met with great satisfaction. The great owl lay on the dark sand, the gray parts of its body nearly matching the earth. Its tufted horns lifted high on its large round head. Its wide jowls blew themselves out as though in anger. It glared from big yellow eyes as it flopped. One wing functioned, spreading itself over 2 feet from the body, and the other wing lay only partially opened and didn't move. From it, a few feathers were missing. Man and owl stared at each other, both in hate, one mixing his hate with glee, and a fine, full feeling of having inflicted deserved revenge. The man laughed in the dawn, looking down upon his adversary. He spoke aloud as though the owl could understand him. "Got you that time. Reckon I did. I got you sure. That was a shot, a pure good shot. It was a miracle shot, and I'd never make another one like it. It got you good, and how do you like it? Do you want the other barrel?" The owl worked its good wing, beating it at the earth. It jumped into the air a little, using the strong, long, sharp claws. But the one wing wasn't enough to fly with, and each time it flopped back again. It went in circles, no larger than its full wing spread of 4 feet. It left uneven tracks in the sand. "Look at you," the man crowed. "Look at you now." And he laughed again. The owl lunged at him, stretching its neck. It struck at the man's heavy leather boots with its hooked beak. "You would you?" Savagely, the man kicked at the bird, which rolled over on its back and lay there, now helplessly. The man brought up his gun again. He sighted it at the owl, and along the sights he saw the yellow eyes hating him, staring with plain, straight, pure hate. Only a wild, unafraid thing could hate like that, or a man who could reason his hate, as in war. The man lowered his gun. He had another thought. The owl had made him suffer for many weeks, and now that he'd caught it alive, he would make the owl suffer before killing it. He reached down and caught the owl by its good wing at the base near the body, and the next instant he howled. He dropped his gun as a talon went deep into his thumb. The claw was as sharp as a steel gaff used in a cockfight. It cut to the bone, and the owl came up with his hands as he tried to get rid of it. He couldn't free himself. The heavy bird clung fast and beat furiously at him with its good wing. He fought it while his fingers and his hands were cut again and again. Blood dripped to the ground and on the owl's feathers. The man kept calling and crying and cursing and yelling. Finally, he had the owl by the legs, holding them with both bloody hands. One talon was still embedded in his flesh. It would tear his hand again when he let go. For an instant, the man considered thrashing the owl against a tree and not caring about the talon. And then he calmed himself a little. He remembered his desire to make the owl suffer. Now there was more reason for it than ever. He looked at the bird. He wasn't able to laugh any more, but he could do something else. He spat into the owl's face. The bird blinked one eye, but not the other, and then stared steady hate again. The man looked for fear, but there was none. He carried the owl to the outbuildings, not noticing the pain of the talon which remained buried in his hand. He went to the sizable cage set down upon the ground that held pheasants he once tried to raise. Its chicken wire was stout, and the back of the coop consisted of a heavy sheet of iron and was almost like armor. The owl wouldn't get out of this. The flesh tore from the buried talon, and in another place the owl slashed. The man slammed the cage door shut, saw that it was securely fastened, and then hurried into the house. In the kitchen, he ran cold water over his hands until the bleeding stopped. It took quite a while, and then he doused his cuts with antiseptic. That stung all the way up to his elbows. The man yowled and yelled and danced and pranced until that awful stinging was over. He bandaged the deepest of his cuts, and then he went out into the full daylight, making his way toward the palmettos. He retrieved his shotgun and brought it back to place it in the rack beside his rifle. He started his day's chores, handicapped by his injuries, and he went about that work grimly. So full of rage he couldn't bring himself to glance at the owl's cage except once to see that it was still there. In the afternoon, one of his customers, a storekeeper from town, drove in to pick up an order. He saw the owl in the cage and the man's bandaged hands and asked, "What you got there?" The man told him, and the customer, after ruminating over the occurrence and examining the owl, inquired, "What you going to do with him?" "I'm going to kill him," the man answered promptly, "when I get good and ready. Maybe a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. Then I'm going to cut off those talons and hang 'em on the wall. They're mine. They belong to me. After the chickens they got away with, and after this..." He held up his hands. He looked at the owl, which clung to the wire with its talons at the front of the cage. The owl blinked one eye, as if winking at him in mockery. He kicked at it, sending the owl off the wire. That night the man heard the owl calling to its mate, and the answering from the woods. He began to enjoy having caught the owl alive. In the morning he looked again for a sign of fear in the bird, but there still was none. "I help you along," he told the owl. "I help you to have it." In front of the coop, he staked out a young chicken, giving it feed and water. He placed the water close to the wire in the cage, but not close enough so the owl could reach it. And each day after that, he put out the chicken and the feed and the water. The owl watched solemnly. It blinked one eye, then the other. In the night it called to its mate and received an answer, but the bird never showed any panic. Instead, it got back the use of its injured wing, which evidently had been only paralyzed by buckshot hitting it, and this enraged the man so much he kicked at it again. On the fifth day, a man came out from town. This was a winter visitor, a tourist, a snowbird from the north, a nosy who'd heard about the owl. "I'll give you $3 for him," the snowbird offered. "No, sir, you won't," the man answered. "I'm going to give you 5, the tourist said. "No, sir, you ain't," the man said again. "I'll make it 8. "He ain't for sale, mister. Not for $800. Not for any price. Not if you offered me $1 million. "You mean you're going to kill him, this beautiful bird, like I've heard, out of spite?" asked the tourist, incredulous. "I'm going to kill him for my own reasons, which ain't yours nor ain't your business. You ain't got business here on my place." The snowbird went away, shaking his head, insulted, and muttering about backwoods people. The man waited for only one thing before killing it. He meant to break the owl's spirit. He decided it couldn't be done by starvation. The owl paid no attention at all to the staked chicken or to the feed and water. The bird simply glared at him with his yellow hate, but showed no desire for them. He blinked one eye at a time, making fun of the man between that stare of loathing. The man removed the chicken and the food, studied on what he thought was a better way. The owl's mate had been making flights to the chicken farm. And more the two birds called to each other. Now they called even in the daytime, and though there might be a plaintive note in the voice of the female, there was nothing of the kind in that of the male. And if anything, there was a stern warning to his mate to keep away. The man kept his shotgun handy, and on the 10th day he had his chance. The female, driven by instinct, concern, hunger, curiosity, any or all of them that you want, came to search out its mate. It came right in over the chicken runs to where it could see its mate in the cage. It lighted on a tall pole and said, "Who?" The male didn't answer, as though indicating that the female should keep still and go away. Deftly the man snatched the gun. Swiftly he aimed and fired with both barrels, and this time there wasn't any paralyzed wing, but a dead owl. He brought it in glee and placed it on the ground in front of the caged male. "How do you like that?" he demanded. "How do you like her now?" The owl stared at its mate. Its jowled face was impassive. The great yellow eyes looked from the body of its mate to the man. The bird winked at him. The man turned from the owl. He went to his house. He felt defeated. The bird's spirit was not broken. Nothing seemed able to break it. There was no fear in it, only that pure hate mixed with the mockery of the blinking. The man's own hate was so great he felt it might consume him. And his gaze, wandering about the room, came to rest upon the rifle with which he meant to kill the owl. For an instant, a strange, unnatural impulse came to him to forget everything, let the owl go, free it now that he obtained his revenge by at least killing its mate. Left alone, maybe the male would leave the vicinity and no longer steal chickens. The generous impulse passed as quickly as it came. The man grabbed up the rifle. He saw it was loaded. He strode out. "Now," he said to the owl, "now." He thrust the barrel of the rifle through the wire. The owl attacked it, pecking at it and clawing, and when he saw it could do no damage, it was no longer interested in the gun that would kill it. The man backed a little, so that the muzzle of the rifle was several feet from the wire to which the owl clung. For a last time, the man looked for fear in the owl's wonderful yellow eyes. There was none. Infuriated, the man sighted, and he yanked at the trigger instead of squeezing it. He fired. At first he didn't know what happened. In addition to the noise of the cartridge being fired, there was a loud clang, and at the same time he was sure someone had hit him in the chest, hard, so hard that he staggered back while the rifle dropped from his fingers. The man touched his chest with one hand. His fingers came away wet and red, and then he felt the tremendous shock and pain, and he knew. He choked, his throat full of hot liquid. A dimness came to his eyes, and he crumpled to the ground. He was still enough conscious before the final dimness came to realize the whole enormous accident. The bullet, hitting the heavy sheet of iron at the back of the cage, had ricocheted and struck him. More than that, he'd missed the owl. Still more, the bullet on its voyage in and out of the cage had cut the wire in two places. The owl now found the opening. As the man's eyes glazed over, the owl squeezed out. It clung for a moment to the outside of the wire, looking upon the man. There was no more hate in its eyes. There never had been any, except in the mind of the man. There had been only the expressionless stare of an owl. And now it blinked one eye, then the other, so that not even for a split second was it failing to watch and be on guard. This also was of what its winking mockery consisted. The owl asked once more, "Who?" Received no answer, and then flew away.
The world's best short stories has just presented The Owl That Kept Winking by Theodore Pratt. This is the University of Illinois Radio Service.